bottom.
It's
Okay,
recording.
so voila, perfect. So indeed, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar on social LCA in the European Union, a tool to measure the social impacts of technology implementation. Maybe I just want to give you a very brief background on why we are doing these sessions. I hope you still see the screen. So indeed, the NEMO project is actually a project working on the recycling of raw materials from mining waste. You will hear a little bit more about it later, not too much. But one of the things there is, okay, we are of course developing different new technologies. We have a lot of technical challenges related to that. But what we also want to study is these new techniques that we are developing, are they sustainable? And then with sustainable, we mean from an economic and environmental, but also a social point of view. We are integrating all of this in a sustainability assessment. And another aspect is mining causes quite some impacts, often does not have the best reputation. So also the acceptance by society as a whole, and especially also the local society, is very important. So we have a lot of activities ongoing on the social license to operate. Now, already from the start of the project, we noticed there are still a lot of questions and issues, and we will certainly mention a lot of them today. And we were wondering, how do others deal with these things? And is it possible to share knowledge and to learn also from other projects tackling the same challenges, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, or that we also, when we have some lessons to share, that we can do that. And that's why we have set up also a series of events. Now, I will not go into detail, but I just wanted to show you very briefly. So on the NEMO website, you can find the reports of the previous events linked to really either the sustainability assessment, how to define the impact of new technologies. We had some sessions also on really the SLO concept, gearing extractive industries towards sustainable development. This is also, again, sustainability being important. The last event we had was actually in March, just before our first lockdown. So we have learned already a lot of that. And now today we are here in this session on social LCA, because this was also a question that came back and an interest that popped up during the previous sessions, which is also a bit at the crossroads of both. So you have the sustainability assessments trying to incorporate also these social aspects, and social LCA is the way to do that. But it's often also based on data coming from different ways of interacting with the community. And then the question is, how do you put all those things together? Now, the first social LCA guidelines were published in 2009, followed also by the methodological sheets in 2013, the GRC technical report in 2015, and now a new update is coming out very soon, beginning of next year. And so what we want to address today is, okay, what have we learned now since then? Some of the case studies you will see will show how we tackle these things. What have we learned? What are still some open questions? And we would like to discuss that together. So the program of today is a very short introduction also to the topic by my NEMO project colleagues. Then we will have 3 case studies presented, to give some examples of how we are dealing with that today, some questions still remaining. After, we will have time for a few questions, probably directly after each of the presentations, but also I invite you to put any questions you have in the chat. When we don't have enough time to deal with all the questions directly after the presentations, we do have a session at the end to debate and ask questions, and we can pick up some of those things you put in the chat later. So then we will have a session on how to integrate then the results of the social LCA in a multi-criteria sustainability assessment, followed by the debate, and then Bernard Mazin will give us a closing statement on how to link also the social LCA to policy. And in the end, we will wrap up and hopefully have an outlook also to the future, what we want to do. Now, just very briefly, before we go to our first speakers, we have prepared a few polls later on also to help in the in the debate maybe, and I would like to start one just now as a test. So I hope you can all see the questions now, and I invite you to click on the link so that we can see whether that's working. Okay, perfect. And so at least there is a lot of response, so I am not talking to myself. That's already nice to know. And I will start off by introducing already our next two speakers, also colleagues in the NEMO project. So Andrea Di Maria is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of the Materials Engineering at the University of Leuven, where he also obtained his PhD in 2018, focusing on future challenges to combine circular economy and life cycle thinking approach in the construction sector. And since September 2018, Andrea has been working at the university on different Horizon projects, but including also the NEMO project, and in general focusing on these near zero waste strategies for mining and metals sector. And then we have another speaker also, Alberto Vázquez Ruiz, who is a Master of Science in Conflict and Development, specialized in topics related to mining and electronics. And he's working at the moment at Catapa, an NGO focusing on the social impacts of mining. And within NEMO, he is the project coordinator for the tasks assessing the social impacts of the implementation of mining technologies. So I stop my screen share and I give the floor now to Andrea to start. And in the meantime, I think, voila, you can also see the results. Okay.
You see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Yes, just a few words about NEMO from me and Alberto before we leave the floor to the speakers for the 3 case studies. So NEMO is mostly focusing on valorizing of sulfidic tailings, which are tailings coming from non-ferrous metals and precious metals mining. The tailings are finally ground residuals that remains after the extraction process, and we have a big stock in Europe, around 28,000 million tons. The main problem with sulfidic tailings is that when we put into environment, in contact with the atmosphere and with water, there is a process of oxidation of the sulfides, and this causes acid mine drainage, which is basically acidic water, which can have very dangerous effects to the surrounding environment. But as you can probably, as you already know, the extraction process of the metals cannot extract 100% of all valuable metals from the mineral ores. So this means that in the tailings, we always find small to medium amounts of valuable metals. So tailings, which we don't have to see tailings as only as waste, but of course there's a big storage of potentially valuable material. And if we can somehow recover these valuable metals in tailings, we can reduce the volume of extractive waste, and it's very important for the mining companies, but also we can recover valuable metals, and we can reduce the European dependency to resource import. So this is exactly the goal of NEMO. NEMO stands for near zero waste recycling of low-grade sulfidic mining waste for critical metal, mineral and construction raw material production in a circular economy. And here this figure summarizes the concept. So we want to take the tailings and we want to develop technologies to recover several different target metals. So we want to recover critical metals, for example, rare earths or cobalt, base metals as copper, nickel, zinc, minerals, and one of the most innovative approach in NEMO is that after we recover these metals, we are always left with the inert fraction, which represents more than 90% of the total fraction of the tailings. So what we want to do with this inert fraction is to recover most of the inert fraction to produce new construction materials such as cement, so binders for construction materials or aggregates. And in the end, the goal is to have only 5% of the original tailings left to put again in landfill. In NEMO, we have several case studies. One of the main case studies, the Sotkamo mine in Finland, which is mostly a nickel zinc mine. And the framework for the case study of Sotkamo in NEMO is that so we take the tailings from the mine. We are developing actually two pilot plants to develop some innovative bleaching processes that aim to extract the metals from the tailings. And then we produce this solution, which we have these dissolved metals, so which is called pregnant leaching solution, PLS. So this pregnant leaching solution is sent to 3 pilot plants, which are developing hydrometallurgic processes to extract, to precipitate these metals. And then we have also the clean matrix that is sent to other 3 pilot plants to valorize the matrix to produce alternative cement or aggregates. So that was just to give an idea, a general idea of what is the goal of NEMO. Of course, you can understand that each of the steps in NEMO requires a lot of knowledge. And so that's why we have many different partners involved in each of the steps. And what is our work in NEMO? It's the sustainability analysis. So we have an entire work package devoted to the sustainability analysis, which is divided into 3 main analyses. So I'm myself responsible for the environmental analysis. Alberto from Catapa is responsible for the social analysis. And then we have DMT from Germany, which is responsible for economic analysis. So the idea of the work package is to perform these 3 analyses in parallel, and in the end of the project to develop some kind of multi-criteria assessment that can combine the results of the 3 analyses to have an overview of the general sustainability of the developed technologies, and also to produce from this analysis to produce also a policy brief, so to have some conclusion for policymakers to how to make mining processes in Europe more sustainable. And then I will give the floor to Alberto for some on the social part.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So I'm in charge of performing the social life cycle assessment of the NEMO technologies, of the implementation of these new technologies. I wanted to focus on the social life cycle of this because, as you know, the assessment of social impacts in mining had been traditionally focused on that relation between the local profit generation and the inequal benefits distribution. Or, Andrea? Yeah. Or the job creation against the job quality, the environmental impacts, or the local national impacts, focusing on negative and positive impacts. But actually, what social life cycle assessment does is something different. Andrea? Thank you. So what the social life cycle assessment framework does is focusing from the stakeholders who are in place. And focusing from the stakeholder, there are not only quantitative or qualitative impacts to assess, but it is a bottom-up and top-down at the same time kind of analysis. So some of those indicators, impact categories, needs the input from the local stakeholders, like the worker here in the screen from the methodological sheets, but also from quantitative data from statistical databases like UN, for example, the hours of work in the mining sector in Finland, in this case. So in this way, we can compare those negative and positive impacts that otherwise we will be focused on other kind of social impacts. Andrea, please. And this is the basis of the social LCA framework. No, we have 5 stakeholders, and those are our categories of analysis. And inside we have the impact categories, the subcategories. And here is the real difficulty of performing the social life cycle assessment, because some of these categories are very difficult to assess. I will put just an example below. In local community, you can see the local employment. Good way or a logical way of analyzing the local employment would be to check how much of the workforce at the mining sites is hired locally. But we know that when you go to work to another place, normally you move also your residence. So when you analyze the local employment, you might be providing the data that they have already moved. How can you then assess that one? So there are many values that are very tricky, and that's why a local stakeholder-based analysis is necessary to complement some of those indicators from the quantitative point of view. Andrea? So this is the case study that we are performing in NEMO. This is the most known by the environmental life cycle cost on the environmental LCA, sorry. But we are adding those social stakeholders. Andrea? You might think that the stakeholders are more inside the company or the company area, but actually for this case study we are using 3 stakeholders, not all of them, because this is mining, this is mineral extraction, is not an end consumer good, is not an end consumer product or service. So the value chain stops at the gates of the mining company, and there is no end consumer to analyze. So we are focusing on the worker, society, and local community. Some of them are inside the mining sites, others are outside, like the society indicators. And this is a main difference between the environmental and economic life cycle assessments and the social one, because we are focusing on a specific site. We are not focusing on the process units. Andrea, go ahead. And this is the kind of case study we are doing. It's a comparative study. So what is happening right now on those assessment sites, and what will be the results of those impact indicators once the technologies are implemented. Go ahead. And this is the final challenge, if it's not enough difficult yet. What we want to do is to visualize, to present the results as the environmental results are doing right now. So having each impact category and showing how they are contributing in positive and negative impacts, comparing the previous and the future situation. This is, I think, the challenge that all of us who are performing social life cycle assessment are facing right now. Thank you, Andrea. I will stress again that the social life cycle assessment guidelines and the methodological sheets were developed thinking in end consumer products, and that this is a challenge to develop them for mineral extraction, and that's something that we are doing, thinking of what are the hotspots, but not only the hotspots for negative impacts, because then we will be leaving out all the positive impacts that the technological implementation will be having. In this framework of NEMO, we can have direct collaboration with the mining partners inside the consortium, but also through the local stakeholders doing the field work. We will provide this case study to the scientific picture to enrich the social life cycle performance. Those are the expected outcomes of NEMO, not only from this industrial perspective, you all know it, but also for the societal perspective. What is the value of reducing those mining tailings that have today a negative impact, especially for the sulfidic ones, and also putting in the picture the relevance of the recovery of the metals inside those mining tailings for a sustainable minerals society. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Alberto. So, okay, because of timing, we will immediately go to the next presentation now. Any questions as I had, please put them in our chat. So the next presentation will be given by Mrs. Claudia Dinoy from Green Delta. She has been a sustainability consultant there since 2017. She's responsible for the sustainability assessment of EU-funded research projects on the topics of raw materials, chemicals, and buildings. She's also a member of the working group for the revision of the social LCA guidelines and co-author of the social LCA PSILCA database. So please, Claudia, take the floor.
Thank you, Lisbeth. So good morning, everyone. Today I'm presenting the work that we at Green Delta have been performing for the ITERAMS project. This project is a Horizon 2020 project, of course, and is going to end basically next Monday. So we are really at the end of the project. And this project brought together 16 partners for 3 main validation sites in Finland, Portugal, and South Africa. And the aim of this project was to work on water, tailings, and environment, regarding water, for more efficient water recycling, for improving the quality of the processed water through more efficient and economical water treatment technologies. And regarding tailings, the aim was to valorize them with the creation of geopolymers, so these alkali activated materials from them, in order to cover mining waste, so tailings and waste rocks, to prevent really harmful emissions, as we know, but also to use tailings to create geopolymers to be used also as backfill material, so structural material for underground mines. And of course, as you might imagine, all this with very important benefits for environment, we say, but really for many other sustainability aspects. If, of course, we can reduce the amount of freshwater intake, the risk of dam failures, preserve water resources that are important then for local communities. But here, then I would say straight to the point, our case study today is the Neves Corvo mine, a copper zinc lead mine in the south of Portugal. And as you can see already from the picture, there are some few villages here that are highly dependent on the mine, mainly for employment reasons, but otherwise we have old and low income population, and in the surroundings the main activities are agriculture for cork and olives and farming. So the research question for the sustainability of social sustainability part of the project was, how do the novel ITERAMS technologies can affect the social impacts that are related to the Neves Corvo mine operation? And to start to answer this question, we performed at the beginning a social hotspot screening study. So starting with literature, review, interviews, but especially we performed a preliminary social LCA study of the mining sector in Portugal with the PSILCA database. And this study was also published, as you see here, in 2018. So regarding this screening with the PSILCA database, we analyzed the impacts for $1 produced from the sector of metal ores in Portugal. And the very interesting thing that we saw is that many impacts, often the top impacts, as you see here in the picture with the orange, in the orange boxes, many of these impacts are related actually to the sector itself and happening in Portugal. So for many of these impacts, such as non-fatal accidents, social responsibility along the supply chain, active involvement of enterprises in corruption and so on, most impacts are not occurring in the supply chain, but related to the sector itself and in Portugal. So based on that, and based also on the problem that we could not receive any specific primary data on the social risks and impacts related to the mining process that we were also analyzing in parallel for the environmental assessment, we decided to reshape basically our research question. Also considering that with our interviews, we already noticed that the perception of social issues by local communities could be as important for our analysis as the social impacts. So we wanted to investigate not only the impacts of these ITERAMS technologies in the social context, but also the possible changes in the local community's perception about the Neves Corvo mine operation. And if we could detect any differences, of course, among these perceived and actual technological impacts. So we had to actually develop a new methodology. This was not existing. We could not find anything similar. And we started, of course, with a description of the mine and of the social context, socioeconomic context. And then we performed a number of steps that you see here in the blue boxes to get to the measurement of the technology impact in the social context. And we compared basically these results with the other steps that we performed here in the green boxes that brought us, that led us to the quantification of impacts of the technologies, but in the perception. So in the present and then in the future perception. And I can show now some of these steps. So we started with the definition of the context, 7 different context categories for a total of 44 aspects that we could identify. Maybe someone can mute. Yeah, thanks. So we highlighted different context categories, from vulnerability of local communities, indigenous people, employment, up to conflict with other economic sectors that we know are quite important in mining, agriculture, tourism, local resources, and so on. And we applied a scale from 0 to 1 to define the importance, so the relevance of the aspect for the area, specific area that we are studying. So I want to show then an example for the water quality aspect. So of course, when we speak about water quality on site, we have different alternatives. So from good water quality to very poor water quality, and to understand which score to assign this, which alternative is fitting to our case, we need to have an identification procedure that we've developed then for each alternative, for each aspect in all contexts. And in our case for Neves Corvo, we know that the quality of the river where the mine discharges is reported from environmental sources as inferior to good, although maybe only locally the point of discharge. But anyway, so this way we could assign the maximum score, so for the relevance of this aspect, and specifically poor water quality, the issue is related to the mine. Then, of course, important step is to define which stakeholders should be included in the analysis. Not only the mining workers, but also the residents, the different economic sectors, tourism, fishermen, agriculture, up to the associations, NGOs, and of course the mining owners and other authorities. Of course, then when we think about the perception about the local activities, local mining activities, then we decided to focus only on the workers and on the local communities, so the residents, the other sectors, and the NGOs, excluding, of course, the mining owners. So if we think then about the screening of the current perception in parallel to the screening of the context, we perform different data collection with surveys, interviews, local news, and so on. And we wanted to investigate if the stakeholder considered that a certain aspect is good, indifferent, or not good for them. And we, of course, also here try to assign a score from -1 to 1 to quantify the perception level. Interesting thing for the water quality, for example, aspect, we interviewed different stakeholders. We got very different opinions. So for some of them, the water quality of the river is great. The fishing activities keep happening there. For others, there are no fishermen in the river. In other cases, we got to know that very often fishermen and farmers blame the mine for the poor water quality on site, for the color of the river, also when these problems, according to environmental studies, are not always related to the mine. So because of that, of course, we had to, it's important to assign then a different score for the current perception of this problem, water quality, depending on the stakeholder that we are analyzing. So very good for residents, for example, quite bad then for all the other stakeholders. And then now we think about the future. So what is the impact of the technology in the social context? Here we still think about the real impact of the technology. So if it has a good positive impact, we assign a score of 1. No effect on the aspect that we consider 0, or a negative impact in the aspect considered, we assign a -1 as a score. So in our case, water quality, for what I said at the beginning, of course, we expect a very positive technical impact for most stakeholders for the topic of water quality, because ITERAMS is really trying to solve and improve this issue. Otherwise, we could have an indifferent impact for the workers. So, but never the worst case of -1, never a negative impact. But then what happens if we consider then the future social perception? So to consider future social perception, we need to combine in a kind of matrix the current perception and the technical impact, and to see how they affect each other. So let's say now here 1 for the current perception, best positive perception for an aspect, and 1 best possible technical impact. We have A as result, and this means that the technology improves something that was already good for population. So in the future perception. Worst case is -1, of course, and -1, where we have that the technology affects negatively something that was not good for the local population. So if we apply this to our case, water quality, this is just then a technical step. And of course, we obtain also for future perception different scores depending on the stakeholders, because of course the starting current perception was already different, and also the impact is slightly different depending on the stakeholders. So what I want to show and to say here is that if we think about our example here, water quality, for many stakeholders, we see that these perceived impacts and technical impacts do not always match. And often the perceived impact is a bit lower than the expected technical impact. And if we aggregate results for the, for example, context, local resources, which brings together water availability, quality, soil quality, and so on, we always have this situation. The technical impacts for different stakeholders, as you see here, are higher than what the different stakeholders might perceive. So, and this is true not only for the local resources, but for all the context categories that we studied for the Vescorvo mine at least. So this means that not all positive and not all negative impacts due to the mine and ITERAMS then could be or are perceived by the local population, because the main perceived social aspects are employment, regional development, working conditions, inclusion in mine decisions, accommodation prices, status of water resources, and ITERAMS actually is going to work mainly on the status of water resources, so not on the other perceived problems. And also finally, I want to say that one important topic that emerged is communication of benefits of the new technologies, or also issues, is very key for the perception of what we have been doing, of the research and of the improvements. And for example, for Vescorvo, many stakeholders said that, yeah, there is communication in place between the mine and the other local communities, representatives, the other people, but this is not done always in a way that can be understood by the people. It's too difficult. So finally, final slide here, lesson learned. So as we saw, often there is a gap between the social impacts of the technologies and the perceived impacts. So we should be able to identify and fill this gap. But in general, here, what we showed, I think, is that social LCA can give an important contribution for the hotspots detection in the life cycle. But in our case, at least, this could not be the only approach in social assessment. This was not enough for what we wanted to do. So then the next step would be, maybe for the next project, then how to integrate our approach in a life cycle perspective and in social LCA tools, such as social LCA databases. And in general, this is a bit provocative maybe, but if a quantitative approach for social aspects makes sense at all, and if so, if and how we could aggregate results then for the social assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia, for already giving us a lot to think about, I think. We do have time, I think, for 1 or 2 questions, if somebody wants to ask one already. Yeah, I don't see immediately, so maybe we will pick up some of those questions later on in the debate, because I think indeed one of the things you already mentioned, that it's very difficult to quantify these social aspects, and that is a major challenge. And you have made it even more difficult, I think, by trying to find out the future perception, even when it's already very difficult to discover what people are thinking today, I guess. So thank you very much for your presentation. Then we will now go to our next presenter, who is Mrs. Stephanie Muller from BRGM. She is an engineer of mines and with a PhD in chemical engineering. And she has been focusing at BRGM, so the French Geological Survey, on life cycle assessment since 2016, focusing also specifically on the processing of raw and secondary materials and the development of environmental indicators related to the use of resources and multi-regional input-output methods to monitor environmental impacts of consumption and production. She coordinates the ERAMIN2 project proper that looks at new sustainability metrics to improve the recycling process performances. So please, Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. And thank you to the organizing committee as well for the opportunity to present here. So I will present some aspects of the social LCA case study we performed in the frame of the H2020 impact project, which looks more precisely at the impacts of small-scale mining in the Balkans. Just not to build too much expectations here, I will not present the case study results in details, but rather speak about the whole. So this study was a part of the Horizon 2020 project impacts that aims at improving the viability of small complex deposit exploitation, on that for all types of deposits, including raw critical materials. And in order to reach that goal, the project is built on a new mining paradigm, the SOSO approach for switch-on, switch-off mining. The idea is to be able to quickly exploit ore deposits, and for that it relies first on innovations such as new mining modular equipment, and by mine planning improvement, by reducing the time of operation of the different mine project steps, such as, for example, the feasibility study, or by reducing the amount of ores extracted and so the amount of waste generated. In order for the SOSO approach to be successful, it has to be easily transferable to multiple deposits, multiple commodities, and multiple countries. And in the frame of impact, it was tested in Bosnia and Serbia on lead and antimony deposits. And finally, some risks are associated also to the approach, such as geological and metallurgical variability, the last being linked to the operational conditions of the mining modular plant. And one of the risks is also the social acceptance of this new mining paradigm. So one of the case study of the impact project was a lead deposit in Olovo. So it's an historical mining town near Sarajevo. And the system put in place to exploit the lead deposit and produce less lead concentrate, is the following. And the system here in Olovo was still in its pilot operations, and I will just put the emphasis on that, on pilot operation. In this context, so our goal here was to explore the social and socio-economic hotspots of lead production, of lead concentrate production, sorry, in order to provide knowledge regarding the most vulnerable spots, and so to establish mitigation measures in the frame of massive deployment of mining in Europe. So in order to perform this hotspot assessment, we choose to apply a reference point method social LCA using the PSILCA database as support. And the following methodology was put in place to model our system. In a first place, so to quantify the exchanges between the industrial activities, we relied on specific on-site data, and for that we used the quantification performed in a parallel environmental life cycle assessment. As the environmental life cycle assessment was performed on pilot operations, we used process simulation to quantify the flows of solids and liquids between each elementary unit of the system, and then these data were coupled with some on-site price information. Sorry. The exchanges in the background were modeled using the PSILCA database, and in a second place, before quantifying the social and socio-economic indicators by activities, we made a first work of selection. And that in order to limit the number of indicators, we try to identify the most relevant in the case of the mining sector in Bosnia. And to identify these key indicators, we rely on 3 different assessments. So in a first place, we consider the hotspots calculated using the PSILCA database for the activity mining and carrying sector in Bosnia. That's in order to have a snapshot of the potential risks that are specific to the country, so to Bosnia. In a second place, we consider the ones identified in the GRC report, social assessment of raw materials supply chain. And that in order to keep the ones, so the subcategories that are relevant to the raw material sector. And finally, we use the assessment of thematic field interviews with local representatives that were conducted in the course of the project on almost 20 people and conducted by Olga Sidorenko, that is listening, I think. And this assessment of these field interviews allow to keep the most important categories for the local community. So in total, we kept 14 subcategories representing issues for the country, for the sector, and for the local community. Then, in order to quantify the different for the we used as many as on-site values as possible. Values were so collected for the indicators regarding the workers stakeholder category, and especially for the health and safety subcategory, and for all indicators regarding environmental impacts, thanks to the data gathered and obtained from the environmental LCA. And for the quantification of the other indicators in the foreground, we use the associated value in the PSILCA mining and quarrying sector in Bosnia. Then the rest of the methodology follows the traditional procedure of type 1 social LCA. Once the indicators are quantified, the associated social risk can be semi-qualified based on the PSILCA risk scale, and the activity variables are determined both using on-site information for the foreground and the PSILCA database for the background. And then the associated socio-economic potential impacts can be calculated. Also, and that resulting to the following elements. First, it has to be noted that 55% of the overall impacts is represented by 6 different hotspots, being the contribution to environmental load, social responsibility along the supply chain, public sector corruption, sanitation coverage, certified environmental management system, and workers affected by natural disasters. And for these hotspots, only indicators associated to the contribution to the environmental load impacts were changed to consider on-site data. Others represent more the ones used in the PSILCA database for the mining and quarrying sector. And moreover, yet a majority of these hotspots occur mainly in the country of operation or in the country of the first supplier. In fact, in the case of the impact project, the United Kingdom is a supplier for majority of the mining modular plant infrastructures. It has also to be noted that the opportunities contribution to economic development is also mainly occurring in the country of operation, so in the foreground of our system. So as I said in the introduction, I'm on the result here, and so we can jump directly to some recommendation associated to this case study. And we can say that the results assessment is here more an opportunity to implement the most appropriate mitigation measures in future business plan which would regulate the massive deployment of social operation in Europe. And in particular, the foreground contribution to a majority of the hotspot is quite important. Moreover, some of the hotspots here are directly linked in a way their associated risks are quantified to initiatives put in place in the operating company to promote corporate social development or environmental and social governance. And in fact, this is the case for the three hotspots: social responsibility along the supply chains, public sector corruption, and certified environmental management systems. The three are directly linked to the management system put in place by the operating company. And moreover, in the frame of the impact projects, co-worker at the University of Eastern Finland proposed a guide to explore CSR in the corporate social responsibility in the small-scale mining sector that can be applied in the management system. And finally, concerning the hotspots contribution to environment load, as an environmental LCA was conducted on the same functional unit, more detailed and specific results from this environmental LCA can be used to mitigate risks in this environmental area. And now finally, here are some concluding questions built on this case study. I qualified them as naive because they are asked with an engineer point of view and not from a person with expertise in the field of social assessments. So the first sets of questions are linked to the fact that the study was here performed on a pilot operation, or for me, and yeah, it might be an opportunity to help define, based on the results, the better management system to be put in place for future operation. And one other question, it's for those who are familiar with environmental life cycle assessment, you know that there might be an upscaling effect when looking at results on pilot operation, and I was wondering if it's here the same on social LCA. The second set of questions are more related to the issues covered by type 1 social LCA. And yeah, I was asking myself if all social mining issues must be covered by this type of social LCA, and that such as, for example, temporal spatial characteristics, as well as the opportunity that here in this case, the project might reduce the supply risk of critical raw materials in Europe. And yeah, then given the amount of data used to perform a social LCA, the question of data representativeness might also be on the table, especially when using databases. And social impact assessment through on-site interview might and are data sources for social LCA. And in this case, and Claudia, you asked already a bit this question, how can we combine effectively this different type of assessment? And finally, as a decision-making tool, social LCA and its results must be communicated to different audiences. In the case of with the multiplication of the studies around a project on the environmental, economic, social sector, can the multiplication of the indicators on which the decision must be made of? And what, and I think this question will be addressed a bit later, what can multi-criteria decision-making tools bring here? And finally, regarding the local community, what can life cycle thinking tools that give quantified results on different types of problems bring to the social license to operate? So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to Antoine Bello from BRGM, Olga Sidorenko from the University of Eastern Finland, Kyran Doyle from the University of Exeter, and Jérôme Baudin and Jacques Villeneuve also from BRGM that performed the work with me, and work that will be submitted in the International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie, for this very interesting talk, and also for a number of the interesting questions that you raise. I wonder if there are some people from the audience who would like to comment or react to the questions that Stephanie asked, or ask her another question. I guess maybe in particular on this upscaling effect. Yes, that are there specific types of upscaling effect that you think about then, Stephanie, or experiences that you've had?
It was really a question put here in the discussion room. But in the case where social life cycle assessment data and quantification of the exchanges between the industrial activities rely on data coming from pilot operations, is there here an issue that we need to be aware of? I don't know. It's more a question for discussion.
Does anyone have any experiences with that they would like to share? Okay, maybe we can come. Yes?
Hello. It's Olga Sidorenko. I can continue with this scale effect, but not with the life cycle assessment, but some of our findings from the social study, which Stephanie mentioned. For us in this study, we identified that scale means really a lot, but it means in the perceptions of local community to mining and the impacts that a mining company can bring to the community. So now we really can see that the expectations about the local employment or about the local benefit that mining can bring to the community can be really high. But if we speak about the small scale mining, certainly the scale of the impacts that mining company can provide is also really smaller, because they don't have such a big CSR companies, or they don't have just the same kind of economic resources that large scale projects can bring to the community. So this is kind of a really very interesting challenge for mining companies and also for local communities to accept small scale mining.
Okay, thank you. We will, well, certainly pick up some of those questions later, but now we will go to our next presenter, who is Mrs. Lucia Mancini from JRC. She has an academic background in agriculture economics and ecological economics, and is working as a scientific officer at the European Commission Joint Research Center. Within the raw materials team, she works to support the EU raw materials policy, in particular for social sustainability and responsible sourcing. And she also contributed to the revision of the methodology for the identification of critical raw materials and the development of the raw materials scoreboard and the raw materials information system. She's also part of the advisory committee of the UN Life Cycle Initiative project on social life cycle assessment, and contributing also to this upcoming revision of the social LCA guidelines. Lucia, we don't see your screen yet, so I hope you can
yes,
share.
Good morning. I am again having some problems to share, so maybe I will send you the updated presentation Elizabeth, if you can show it.
Indeed.
So it will be easier for us to proceed.
Okay, I don't have it yet.
Yeah, I'm sending it, just a moment.
Well, in the meantime, while we are waiting for this presentation, I do want to invite you again to place any comments or questions you have in the chat so that we can come back to these later. And I'm still...
Yeah, just sorry for... I am having some problems. I don't know why it's...
if you want, I can open the previous version of the presentation.
Let's see if maybe I will try with my personal email, because I'm having some problems with the corporate mail now, but should be able. Okay. Okay, let's go with the one that I sent to you in order to be quicker, because
perfect.
it's very, very similar, by the way.
Okay, I will open it immediately. And share the screen. You just let me know when to click. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so you can already go. As a joint research center, we are supporting the European Commission through our scientific and technical studies, and we are, as a unit, we are based in Ispra in Italy. And you can go to the next slide, where in our unit we have different activities. Some of them concern raw materials, so we also perform foresight analysis of strategic value chains, and we host the raw material information system. And we also have some activities on life cycle assessment, and developed the European platform on LCA already many years ago. Next, please. Okay, today I will describe the outcomes of our research project that we carried out last year concerning responsible sourcing of batteries. Responsible sourcing is an emerging area in the research, and many headlines and media attention focused on this topic in the last months, especially in relation to the provision of materials for the low carbon economy and the decarbonization of the economy. So next, thanks. From a EU policy perspective, this topic is included in the von der Leyen Commission priorities under the free and fair trade chapter, and where is mentioned the zero tolerance policy on child labor, for instance. It's also important to mention that starting from next year, the conflict mineral regulation will be implemented for tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold. And there are also specific actions for batteries that are considered strategic technologies in the EU. So there is a battery regulation that is, the Commission is working on the update of this battery regulation that might include also some responsible sourcing requirements for producers. Next, please. So for what concerns cobalt, we know that cobalt is a very important material for batteries. It is also a critical raw material for the EU, so it has a high supply risk and economic importance. Also due to the fact that its demand is expected to grow a lot in the future, and also because it is mainly produced in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that also own most of the reserves and resources for this material. We also know that a relevant share of the production comes from artisanal mining. And next, please. You can see from the graph that this sector is really important also in terms of flexibility, because as we saw a couple of years ago, when the price of the material increased, there was a big increase also in the number of miners that migrated from other areas to the DRC and responded to this increase of price. Next. So we wanted to focus on this sector that is mainly located in the Katanga province of the DRC. Cobalt is mined together with copper with a manual extraction in open pit or also in underground galleries. Artisanal mining is a key livelihood option for a population, and creates also quite a lot of jobs, also direct but also indirect, through the provision of services to the miners. Due to its nature, that is mainly informal and sometimes illegal, with sometimes also conflict with the large mining scale operations, the sector is prone to human rights abuses and other severe impacts. Next, please. So we wanted to see how the responsible sourcing initiatives working on cobalt artisanal mining are the impact that they are having on the ground. The two initiatives that were implemented for at least 1 year when we started the study were only these two: better mining from the RCS Global Group, and the Mutoshi pilot project, that is a partnership between Trafigura, a trading company, CEMAF, a mining company, and also an NGO, the NGO Pact. So despite this the number of allegations, the number of news that we get from DRC on cobalt, there were only two small initiatives ongoing 1 year ago. Please go ahead. Okay, thanks. So the research questions that we want to reply were about the impacts on the ground of these initiatives, if social conditions were improved, and if these improvements were due to the schemes implemented. Next. The methodology that we used started from an hotspot analysis that allowed to confirm that cobalt is among the materials used in batteries the most critical from a social point of view. We then compared the demands of different standards that I'm going to talk in the next slide. And we took from this standard a list of information that we wanted to collect in the field. So through stakeholder interviews, but also phone interviews and document consultation, we collected all the data, and we assessed if there was an improvement in a set of 14 impact categories. Next. Next, please. Thanks. So concerning the selection of framework, we started from a work by Van der Brink, where the responsible sourcing approaches are divided into two typologies. So the due diligence schemes that are mainly based on OECD guidance, that is the main standard worldwide. Sorry that here we have some animation, but you can show all of them in once, maybe it's easier. So the OECD guidance is considering a series of risks that goes from severe abuses like forced labor, child labor, but also very specific risk on related to mining, like for instance the use of security forces or non-state armed groups present in the mines. Then we added the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Metal and Minerals guidance. So this is based on the OECD guidance, but adds some additional aspects. And concerning the sustainability schemes, we took into account the IFC performance standards that are mainly used to evaluate development projects, and also the social LCA, which has a very big list of categories, and we took into account those that were not already included in the other frameworks. Next, please. So concerning the results, we could collect all this big amount of qualitative information and assess if there was an improvement compared to the situation of the sector in general. And if this improvement were due to the initiatives itself. So you can see here that the positive improvements were mainly concerning the child labor, corruption, health and safety, and environmental impacts. Next, please. The role of social LCA in the assessment was quite important because we had to also consider that are not included in the responsible sourcing schemes, which focus mainly on risks, while the social LCA could, for instance, spot the aspect of income that emerged as very important for the local stakeholders, for miners, and for instance, assessing the income category, we could notice that one of the initiatives, for instance, was paying the cobalt much less than the local market. So this is quite a crucial issue for the assessment of these initiatives. And also in the inclusion of positive impacts, because artisanal mining can have many impacts, but is also a very important source of income for the population. And sometimes the easiest way for big companies to avoid severe impacts is to exclude artisanal mining for their supply chain, but this would create other important impacts, that is their income reduction. Next. I just wanted to mention also another study that we made a couple of years ago together with Serenella Sala, and this was a general review of the literature concerning the mining sector impacts, and we detected which are the impacts that are mostly identified in 50 papers, and we compared these impacts with the indicator used in different frameworks, including the social LCA databases. Next, please. So we could identify a list of positive and negative impacts that are mainly associated with the mining. And next, please. We could also see which are the gaps, the main gaps related to the different frameworks, and here specifically we highlight those related to the social LCA databases. So, for instance, the demography aspects that are very relevant because in developing countries, migration flows are sometimes very much dependent on the mineral supply. It's in the social LCA databases are difficult to grasp because also a subnational level of the indicator should be used. Next, please. So concerning the conclusion and the key lesson learned, we saw that the raw material initiatives have brought some improvements in the condition of the sector, and we also understood that it's very important to support artisanal and small-scale mining because it's very job intensive and provides a source of livelihood for a lot of people. Moreover, an important aspect that is price of the material and the fairness of the trade should be also included in the schemes for responsible sourcing. Why, for the moment, they mostly focus on avoiding the worst impacts. We could detect some gaps of the social LCA databases, especially on demographic aspects, as I said, but also on land competition, that are aspects that are difficult also to grasp with a top-down approach. So we learned how it's important to assess also positive impacts. Also when in responsible sourcing, it's important to acknowledge that artisanal mining has also positive impacts, so shouldn't be excluded. And last lesson is about the integration of top-down and bottom-up approaches, as of course the analysis that can be done with the social LCA databases have to be integrated with data collected on the ground, and which allow to have a better detail on the things. And as already said from the last presenter, I would also warn about the quantification that is very useful for some purposes, and especially also for policy support. But in some cases, we have also to be careful because quantifying could mean losing a lot of information. And so there are trade-offs, I think, between quantitative and qualitative assessment. So thank you for your attention, and sorry for the technical problems. Feel free to ask me any question in case you have.
Yes, indeed. Lucia, thank you. Well, unless there is an urgent question, feel free to ask, but otherwise I suggest we continue with our next speaker, and then we go to the debate afterwards where you can ask all questions together. Andrea, I will give the floor back to you. If you could make it, I don't know, in 10 minutes, that would be great.
Right. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, my presentation is short because I just want to highlight some of the challenges that are related to the use of social LCA into a more general sustainability analysis. So what we saw so far is all the issues we have when we have to perform a social analysis. But then there is a further challenge, which is how to use these social results into a more general sustainability assessment. So when we have to combine then the social results with the environmental and economic analysis. So exactly, if we want to assess sustainability, we need an holistic assessment. So we have to find an answer, so to reduce environmental degradation, prevent negative social impacts, and increase social and economic benefits. And as we all know, the sustainable development has the three pillars, so social, environment, and economy. One way of tackling all these three kind of assessments is to apply life cycle thinking. So the three methodologies deriving from life cycle thinking. This is only one of the possible approach. So we can perform the three methodologies, so environmental LCA, life cycle costing, and social LCA to assess sustainability. Of course, the combination of these three methodologies has some advantages. So for example, because first of all, they are consisting framework because they are all coming from the life cycle thinking. If if we apply the three methodologies, we can share the main assumption and the hypothesis, and we can set a common goal and scope of the analysis. But at the same time, we have a lot of challenges. We want to combine the three analyses. So I will list a few challenges. Of course, there are many others, and we can discuss further in the debate. So one of the challenges in the inventory step. So when we collect data, first of all, because, and this is what we are seeing in NEMO, we need different kind of data. So we need environmental, economic, and social data from the partners. So this means that we need people with different expertise. And that's why in NEMO, for example, we have three partners assessing with three different expertise assessing the sustainability assessment. Another challenge is the stakeholder identification. So we saw from the previous presentations and also what we are seeing now in NEMO, stakeholder analysis is very important for social assessment, but it's not, doesn't have the same role for environmental assessment, for example. And also the role of the different stakeholders may be different if we do environmental analysis or social analysis or economic analysis. So one of the examples is it's quite easy to identify the role of stakeholders when we do an environmental analysis, because reduction of environmental impacts is a benefit for basically everyone. While, for example, when we do an economic analysis, the role of the stakeholders may be different, because if we aim to reduce the cost for one stakeholders, at the same time, we are reducing the benefit, the revenues for another stakeholders. So the role of stakeholders between the three analyses is different, and this can be a challenge to tackle, to identify exactly these different roles. And then a last challenge in the inventory analysis is to set boundaries, because there are unique processes that are very relevant for example, environmental analysis, but they do not have any relevance for social analysis, and also the opposite situation. So the three methodologies may apply different cutoff rule. So our system, the system that we analyze may be very, very broad, and it's not always easy. For example, if we include processes that are relevant for the social analysis, it may not be easy to include the same process also for the environmental analysis. And another challenge is the impact assessment. All ex-LCA practitioners are always this question: should we aggregate or not, our results? And aggregation, it's very important, and when we have to combine the three methodologies, so environmental LCA, life cycle costing, and social LCA, we are even adding other layers of aggregation. So first of all, we have the aggregation of the methodology itself. So for example, as we will see in environmental analysis, we can have several levels of aggregation, but then after that, we have the final result from the environmental analysis, and then we have the final result for the economic and the social analysis. So should we also try to find a common weighting factor? So at the end, we will have only one result for the environmental LCA, one result for the cost analysis, and one result for the social analysis, and try to combine these two results. So those are also open questions that when we combine the three analyses, we need to face. So why is this so important, aggregation? And I put here the example of environmental analysis. So the structure of an LCA is you collect data, so you assess which are the environmental interventions of a technology you want to, or a product you want to analyze. So you list all the raw material extraction, the emissions, and so on. And then the model calculates which is the effect of this intervention into the environment, and list different impact categories. And each of these impact categories has a different unit, since it expresses a different effect on the environment. And so it's already, if we stop at this point, we will have several different results. So one result for each category. So one way of presenting the results in a more clear way is to aggregate into the damage that these environmental effects can cause to different areas of the environment. So the damage we can cause on human health, the damage we can use on resource depletion, and the damage we can cause in ecosystem. But of course, if we aggregate results, we lose a bit of details and we increase the uncertainty of the results. But if you want to present your results to policymakers, to people that are not expert in LCA, aggregation may be a very important way of presenting, make your results more understandable. Because these are an example, for example, of a paper, one of my papers in which I presented the results only stopped at the category levels. So you can see each of the columns represent different scenarios. So we are comparing 4 scenarios, and each group of 4 columns represent 1 different categories. So as you can understand, you can see it's very hard to say here which is the the scenario with the best performances. So the aggregation in just a few parameters may add really value in results communication. And so this is only for environmental analysis, but when we add also cost analysis and social analysis, we are adding several levels of aggregation. So as I said, in the end, we will have results. Let's say that we aggregate the results from the 3 methodologies, and we have 1 result for the environmental LCA, 1 result for the life cycle costing, and 1 result for the social LCA. So we should find a common weighting factor to express all these 3 results in order that we can compare these 3 results in a multi-criteria analysis. So as just to highlight many levels of aggregation we should add if we want to find a common unit of analysis for the 3 methodologies. An alternative that I found, for example, in the UNEP guidelines for the life cycle sustainability assessment is not to aggregate results, but to evaluate the trade-off between economic benefits and social and environmental burden. So as you can see, for example, in the figure, those are 4 different marbles produced in Italy. So the comparison of 4 different marbles. And here the authors is not aggregating results, but is presenting the trade-off between the 3 analyses. So for example, we can say that in the case of scenario C, we have the best performance in environmental LCA, but if we look at scenario D, we have the best economic performance. And for example, in scenario B, we have it's always a trade-off between, we have a good social performance, but not so good environmental performance and cost performance. So this can be a way of not aggregating results, but finding the trade-off between the 3 areas of analysis. And I'd like to finish the presentation with a quote from a paper that goes beyond the advantage of combining the 3 methodologies only because they belong to the same framework and they have the same modeling structure. But we can see the environmental LCA, the life cycle costing, and the social life cycle assessment as 3 different ways of extracting indicators from the same system. And I think these are good definitions. So maybe we should treat the 3 analyses in parallel and then trying to extract information from each of analysis and have general conclusions. But of course, this is open to discussion in the debate, and I would like to hear your opinion about aggregation and how to present or to combine the results of the 3 analyses.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, for this well, nice talk to show some additional challenges and questions. Yes, would anybody like to comment on how to combine these different analyses and trade-offs between the results we get from them?
Maybe I have a comment about Andrea's presentation. My idea, and I mean our experience after the studies that we have done, it's that in principle it would be very useful to have this tribal framework with I mean an aggregated result for social LCA, environmental and life cycle costing, but I experienced that in practice it's much more difficult to get to this framework, and I think that the social part should be treated a little bit differently from the others, because social aspects have some peculiarities, and I mean sometimes quantifying and aggregating means losing a lot of information. So it's difficult. I know that it's very challenging also to provide clear results and clear answers sometimes, but I think we cannot ignore that there are different stakeholders' perspectives that should be integrated and should be all taken into account. And also there are some aspects that are simply not possible to quantify. So concerning the last, I mean, this idea of having three pillars equally assessed or equally communicated in the same way, I think it's a bit in the practice it's not really the case. Maybe you can do it for some selected aspects, like there are some aspects like jobs that can be easily quantified, but also in jobs, okay, you can quantify the number of jobs created by, for instance, a technology, but also quality is important. So you should look at the type of condition and so on. So I think it's a challenging field here. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can also say something based on our experience. And yeah, this indeed first matches what Lucia already pointed out. But so in general, I think that yeah, we should, I think, not aggregate, or at the moment it's very challenging to aggregate together the results from the environmental, from the social and the cost. It's already difficult, but it also, as Andrea said, could be useful to do this aggregation maybe for the different dimensions so separately, when you need to present results to non-experts, but for sure when taking decisions, I think this should be presented in a transparent way. So still presenting all the criteria, or at least the hotspots. And we have seen that, for example, social LCA in all three presentations of the case studies was very useful for the hotspots detection. So I think this is a very important role. But beside that, what we did for ITERAMS to try to combine the different dimensions, not in a quantitative way, but in a qualitative way, was to try to look not at the different impact categories, so not at climate change and I don't know, worker accidents and so on, so not at the different impact categories for the different dimensions, but to the different topics. So as I tried to show in my presentation at the beginning. So when you try to identify different topics such as water quality or security, health and safety, you can try maybe to see, still in a qualitative way, but to identify the cost-effect relations of your technologies for the different dimensions. So dimensions also related to stakeholders, of course, especially because environmental issues always have in the end a consequence on the societal stakeholders. So if you think that your technology can improve the water quality, then you can see, okay, this has, for example, costs for the mining companies to treat this water, but you have other economic benefits if the value of your concentrate increases. You can have maybe improved safety for your workers if you have a reduced risk of dam failures, and you have the local community that is happier because I don't know, they feel that the color of the water that they use for their gardens is better. So in this case, I would not start already from the impact somehow, but from the topic that you try to solve.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, but I think it's also complicated the analysis, because then you will have different topics, and for each topic you will have different results.
Yes, I mean, in our case, in a qualitative sense, it was not, I mean, too difficult to put together all the things. For sure, of course, when you have different than quantitative results, then this becomes challenging. But yeah, this maybe leads to another thing then. If maybe having a qualitative type of assessment maybe can solve the issue of aggregation, because in the end you are not, you don't have to aggregate anything. You just have topics, again, or impacts that you can solve, or that for which you have positive or negative aspects, maybe.
Okay.
Thank you. And a bit of problems with the connection, so I was lost for a short while. But I think it's an interesting suggestion. So to focus on topics instead of impact categories. I was wondering, maybe Stephanie, if you could also add on to this discussion, because I noticed in your presentation that you performed social LCA and environmental LCA on the same unit to compare both. Maybe you could elaborate a bit on how you did that.
Yeah, we perform both, and we don't try to aggregate the results of environmental and social LCA, but we present both separately. Because as well, I'm not sure that in our case, the two types of assessments were answering the same initial original questions. Mm-hmm. Like in the case of the environmental assessment, it was really also to compare the resulting impacts of the new developed technology to the ones of the business as usual, and also to identify some eco-design solutions that can be put in place. And in the other case, it was in the case of the social life cycle assessment, it was more to identify, like, no, it was not really the same questions as we are not on the same on the same issues.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually also a good comment, that in order to compare, you need to have the same research questions formulated at the front, of course, and that's indeed not always the case. Maybe yes, to involve also with our other participants. I think based on the discussion we now had, I'm going to ask you to share your opinion on this aspect of. So I'm launching a poll, maybe to describe the different aspects. So indeed, what do you think? Should we normalize each assessment to one number that we then can compare? Do we select a number of hotspot categories, saying, okay, these are the ones that are important, and then we don't aggregate, but we try to combine and make an overall assessment? Or do we just keep everything as it is and then look at all the impacts separately? And then, let's say, yes, please give your opinion. I actually don't know if you can now see these results coming in or not. Okay. So we do have some, let's say, opinions are divided a bit. I think it also depends maybe a bit on what the aim is finally, whether you want to make a very detailed scientific assessment where the people reading the report have a lot of time and knowledge to reflect on this, or do you want to have some sort of summary, easy way of presenting results for a general public? And probably each has their own.
Maybe it could be interesting to hear the opinion of someone from the policy side.
Yes, indeed.
Scientific side, we all agree that it's best to go into details, but
yes, indeed. Yes, Bernard, maybe you can give a comment to that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a bit difficult because I have two hats on. I would say that the presentation that we have seen in the different cases, working with colors and so on, that this is quite useful for policymakers, because then they have in one side they can see what is the outcome of the research. But what I'm looking for already for a long time as a researcher is involving mathematical science, where we are using some techniques from multi-criteria assessment. I'm thinking about principal component analysis, for example, to compare alternatives, where you don't aggregate because then you lose information. But in these kind of techniques, you can also work with qualitative, semi-quantitative, quantitative criteria and results. So I would really like to see that there is an intermultidisciplinary approach over there with our colleagues from mathematics in order to try to make progress, because that is then really scientific based, I think. And then in the end, still, you can try to think about the presentation to policymakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment. I think it's indeed also very challenging but very interesting way of going forward. I will share the results now for our poll, saying that okay, there is indeed some a bit of differences. Can you see the results now actually? Okay, perfect. So maybe to also launch another question again that we had at the beginning. So I noticed there were a lot of issues with regard to quantification. How do we quantify? But maybe before I do that, I'm going to launch a very short poll, just to have an idea of who is in front of us now. To see, because I guess this maybe can also change the results, just to have a bit of an idea of, okay, people attending now, how well are you familiar with social LCA already at the moment, before you even came here? So okay. So there are actually quite a lot of people saying, okay, we have basic knowledge, but we want to know a bit more, and a few experts, luckily, in the panel. And some people still deciding, I think, where to put themselves. Okay. Well, I think you had enough time, and if you didn't respond, then so you see, indeed, we have a bit. Actually, most people here say, okay, we have some basic knowledge, but not full experts yet, at least. Then maybe to come back to this question of how do I know? Okay. Maybe just one thing about this quantification. We had two questions. For example, what do you think is the most relevant quantitative parameter to evaluate the social impact for workers? So this is already just even for one category and one stakeholder. Maybe see if we agree already on one quantitative parameter. So I hope you see the question and you can answer. You're probably thinking about it. Because this is probably, yeah, it's a bit the same challenge that we see before with the aggregation. If you try to quantify, you lose detail. If you put everything qualitatively, then it becomes difficult to compare. So I'll give you just a minute to reply.
It was very difficult. Impossible.
Okay. Maybe in the meantime, I received a question through this chat from Olga Sidorenko that I want to share with you. And this is a question about the reliability of the raw data. So the interviews, the observations which are used for the social LCA, how reliable are they, and what qualitative data is considered enough to integrate it? So maybe some experiences from people having done that social LCA, when you think, or are there occasions where you think, okay, this data we don't think is relevant or reliable enough to include? I don't know, Alberto or Claudia, whether you can give a comment.
Well, so this is a very good question. This is why we thought that we should then add the perception of people to our analysis. Because of course the perception is based on different opinions depending on the stakeholders that you consider. And this is why we tried, although it was sometimes difficult, to distinguish between the objective impact that we could try to predict on the different social issues that we could collect, let's say in an objective way again, and the perception. So our solution here was to try to distinguish between these two dimensions, to be able to consider everything, and within the perception, not to make, not to give an absolute number again, but to distinguish between different stakeholders that have different opinions. I don't know if Alberto as an NGO has more experience with that.
Yes, so for us, first of all, I think that evaluating this kind of perceptions is very important when you are writing your assessment in the introduction part, to say openly why you are performing that study. Because indeed, in the majority of social LCAs that I read, this perception by local stakeholders or by the local population is there, but I don't find why that case study was performed. What was the intentionality of the researchers when doing that? Because many times I see that they are focusing on how the local population or the local communities are seeing the public acceptance or the acceptance of the activities, if they are happy or they are not happy with the mining related activity. But for us as an NGO, we are not evaluating that. That's not our concern. What is the public acceptance of mining or not? We are not interested in that, but we are interested in the impact assessment. Because as an NGO, we are totally independent on how mining is seen. We don't want to compromise ourselves with that kind of topic. We want to find the kind of indicators that socially, scientifically, you can say that are more certain than others. I will put an example for engineering related to social science. So a mining engineer will analyze the ore that they are going to extract from a mine, and they are going to focus on the mineralization of that to see the kind of elements, metal elements that are there, to see the profitability of extracting them. But a mining engineer will not focus on which kind of elements are inside, like asbestos, because in mining engineering, they don't think that they can cause contamination, but just moving the ore that is in the underground. But a geologist focusing on ground soil water pollution will not focus on the mineralization of that ore, but will focus on if there is contamination by heavy metals of asbestos, for example. Both are researching from the engineering point of view the same kind of material, but the two are focusing in a different thing. So the same research on the same object will have different results, even in engineering or geological science. The same happens with social scientists. So you need to think about what can be the less subjective, let's say, kind of indicator, and also justify why you think so. That justification is something that I don't find always, and that is very, very key element for us as an NGO. We need to know why that research was done and why that indicator was selected. And I put the example for the workers, for example. You can focus on the perception they have, if they are happy with the company and so on, more subjective point of kind of indicators, but you can also see the amount of fatal accidents divided by the total accidents, and see if in the general sector of all kind of employment in that country or in that region, what is the difference? If there are more, if there are less, and of course, evaluate the perception of the workers of that company, saying, okay, maybe it's not just a personal perception of that people, but you can relate or reference to the data, the quantitative data by third parties, in this case, the state, the agency of employment. And you can see, okay, the workers are saying that they are not happy because they think the safety measures are not enough. And this quantitative data is showing that indeed the fatal accidents by the total amount of accidents are indeed higher, or they are not higher, and still they are saying that they are not happy with the safety measure. So the way of referencing that and why you are doing the research is also affecting to the results, and especially for social assessment and for social science is key to say why you are doing that and why you are evaluating the perception of the people. I don't know if I could contribute.
Absolutely. Maybe just one quick clarification from Olga, maybe on her question, and then we will go to Bernard for his talk. But maybe Olga, you can explain yourself better what your question is.
Yes, I'm sorry if it was a bit confused, but thank you very much for your replies. I think it was something like along the same lines which I was thinking. I was also just wondering, but maybe we could talk about this later. So when you are speaking about the comparison of the hotspots that you can find and these perceptions from the mining workers, let's say, and in this way you are using interviews. So then my question was, how many of these interviews you consider enough to make these comparisons? So are you speaking with 5 mining workers, let's say, to access it, or you think that 2 of them will be enough, or you need 10 of them? So this kind of the mix of this qualitative data from the interviews and the data that you usually have in social life cycle assessment. This was my point.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't know if there is an easy answer to that to give. I will give you a bit of time to reflect on it, because maybe we can discuss, continue the debate a bit afterwards. But now I want to give the floor to Bernard to make sure we stick within his time schedule as well. So maybe a short introduction. So Mr. Bernard Mazen has a background in agricultural and environmental engineering, and also complemented this with studies on collaboration with developing countries. And he has focused his work on sustainable development, sometimes also with an eye on the environment. And over the last 25 years, he's actually developed his career along 2 paths. with one foot, as you already mentioned, in the academic world, also educating students as guest professor at University of Ghent, but on the other hand, also supporting and evaluating policy from the local to the international level. He was also one of the authors and chairs of the guidelines for the social life cycle assessment that was published in 2009, has taken part in numerous projects since. And now since October of this year, Bernard is also heading the Federal Cabinet for Sustainable Development in Belgium in our very recently appointed government. So please, Bernard, the floor is yours.
Elisabeth, thank you all for inviting me. The title of the cabinet is more complex than only sustainable development. My minister is as well responsible for climate, environment, and the Green Deal next to sustainable development. Thank you for inviting me. For sure, I'm applauding your research efforts as well. The research efforts of the host as well of those of the three presentations, and I recognize for sure quite a lot of the questions put forward by the researchers, the lessons learned as well, for example at the end of each presentation. As you mentioned, in fact the research on social LCA started approximately 25 years ago, at least for myself. I was an environmental engineer, but at that time I started to work at the Faculty for Political and Social Sciences. And I had the opportunity to work together in an inter and a multidisciplinary way with social scientists, with economists, with anthropologists, and so on. So the humanities at the university. And I think that was really crucial at the time to have a breakthrough in the methodological research to better understand the product system from the social and socio-economic perspective. And indeed, I could afterwards from 2004 on chair the task force under the UNEP Life Cycle Initiative to look for a common ground for guidelines for the social LCA. Together with Catherine Benoit, I edited these guidelines in 2009, more than 10 years ago now. But it was a collective effort of 60 members, if I recall, that crossed and passed by the task force. And I'm recalling these early times because, well, we were not really living in a digital world. A webinar like this one with performance technology was not possible. We need to meet face to face in a physical way, and it was for all of us at the time voluntary work to work on that issue next to the day-to-day job, and at last I would say it was also regarded as a political approach. Social LCA was a political approach, not a scientific approach by some. And I guess the latter is still the case in at some fora. But let's ask ourselves, political, isn't it all about politics? Last Tuesday, at least in Belgium, you could see a documentary on Arte television about mining in the Global South. The documentary is based on the book The Rare Metals War, The Hidden Face of the Energy and Digital Transition. It's written by Guillaume Pitron in 2018. Guillaume Pitron is an investigation journalist from Le Monde Diplomatique, and he has been doing years of field research. And let me highlight maybe one element related to the topic of this webinar, where you could see in the different presentations a kind of maybe tension between looking at what is going on in Europe and on the other hand looking at the global world. The industry has been downsizing mining activities for virgin materials in France, for example, because it's up to 4 times cheaper to buy critical raw materials on the world market. And you guess why? Often environmental protection requirements and social considerations are less strict than in Europe. So yes, indeed, LCA, environmental LCA and social LCA, applying it to value chains is important, not only in Europe, but indeed looking at the global value chains. I just want to put a challenge before you. In fact, by referring also to the title of this webinar as a first point, it's about applying LCA in the European Union. It makes me think about two other aspects of related research. One, as a result of a series of conferences, the colleagues Massari, Sonneman, and Balco edited a book published in 2017 on life cycle approaches to sustainable regional development. And with regional, they were referring to the continent, for example, Europe, to cross-border or intra-national regions. And the second point is, well, what about circular economy? Do we choose the European Union, for example, as the place to operationalize it, as a part of the European Green Deal, for example, and therefore not at a global level? It's something to think about, because it might influence this background. It might influence our thinking about the indicators and the targets as mentioned in the methodological sheets. Are we still satisfied, for example, with the ILO conventions or for the category workers, or do we need to mirror in the targets the social protection as applicable in the European countries? Now, a final reflection maybe. During the last decade of the previous century and the first decade of this century, the work was on social LCA was most of the time voluntary. I mentioned it before. But it was an engagement of researchers, knowing that sustainable development is about the 3 dimensions, and asking themselves why a product or a service should only be evaluated against environmental considerations. It would not have been possible for this group of people at the time to deliver without support of the intergovernmental agencies and also of public authorities from particular regions or countries that did explicit supported this process by funding, for example, our face-to-face meetings, the layout of the guidelines, the printing of it, the translation in other languages. I recognized from that time the support from the governments of Quebec and Flanders and the federal government in Belgium, for example. And now with the revision inside of the 2009 guidelines, and then was mentioned by the host in the introduction, that will be published in 2021. I would think that governments and public authorities, that they would support again the publication and the wide spreading of the new version. And then also support funding for research. And maybe to all of you, member of the research community, you could also approach your ministries, your ministers, or your MEPs, because if they are aware of the importance of social LCA as a part of our strive to keep a decent society now and in the future, maybe they could pay more attention to it and allow us, you, in fact, also to, as a part of LCSA, really to work in depth on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernard, for these. Yes, a lot of things to think about, indeed. And I think it's a nice way also, or quest indeed, to make sure that all of us actually can play a part in contacting and supporting this research, and also getting it known. So this is also, I think, an important role that we can play with NEMO and with the other projects that we are doing, of raising up the level of the importance and taking this further. And I think another very important point that you indeed raised is, do we look at the local level? Do we look globally? Do we look at the European level? I think I myself, I'm not a social scientist or social LCA expert, but we notice this also already in the environmental LCAs and other aspects, that often there is a choice between a higher local impact for when we want to recover metals, when we want to do things, and the global impact of indeed people in other countries are not always counted in the same way. So we are actually at the end of the foreseen time slot. So, well, we can, of course, I think we can stay on a bit longer to continue the debate. But for those who have to leave, thank you all for your contributions. Maybe just two final things. Yes?
Maybe Elizabeth, before people start leaving.
Yes.
I would like to share the proposal for a joint paper.
Yes, that was what I was going to do as well, but you can do it as well.
Yeah, yes, I'm going to.
Well, yes, because maybe while Andrea is looking for the presentation, indeed, I wanted to come back to what are our next steps. So I think today we have raised a lot of questions. We haven't found all the answers, but we would like to continue a bit working on that. And we would also like to have your input further on. And one of the things we had suggested as a step forward is indeed, well, I can also share it if you want, Andrea.
Yes, I found it, yes.
Okay. To maybe engage in writing a paper together. Andrea, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit.
You see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so just the idea of a joint paper. Of course, this is for the three presenters today, for the 3 case studies, but of course for anyone that would like to join. So the idea is to write a paper on the social analysis in a multi-criteria assessment for sustainable mining. So of course the focus should be the mining sector. And the research question we would like to try to answer is how to account and integrate social impact into a more general sustainability assessment. The idea would be that, so we state the problem, which is the social LCA in the mining sector, and then in a more integrate analysis. So we use the case studies that you presented or other case studies from other people that are attendants in the workshop. And then we have some general conclusions, the status of the social analysis and for the mining sector. So everyone who is interested can just send to me or to Lisbeth, to Alberto an email expressing their interest. We can organize some call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I suggest.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, in the slide I had added also your email address. But as I mentioned before, we will surely contact you afterwards also to share a bit the reports, the presentations I think will also be made available, and then we will ask you again. So of course, anybody who is willing can also now indicate already in the chat that you want to join or write a paper later or an email later. And then indeed we will see, we will contact those willing to contribute directly to exchange further. Maybe another thing that I want to mention is that we are also thinking already about a next event in March next year. Maybe, okay, well, it will look also at the technical aspects a bit of recycling mining waste. A new business is our title so far. So we're looking into what will make recycling of mining waste successful economically, but we also want to look at the social aspects there. At the moment, the date is not yet fixed, but as soon as we have more information, we will share this with you. And of course, you are then free to further share it. Okay, so that's another thing to put, well, put in your mind already. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are a bit out of time, but if there are still questions or things that you would like to contribute, then we can certainly stay on a bit longer. I don't know if there are any...
I have a comment, Elizabeth, if I can, concerning,
yes,
concerning the discussion that we had some minutes ago about reliability and also the interviews, because I would like not to give the message that, I mean, there is of course some subjectivity in the social assessment, but there is also a rigorous way of doing the analysis. And of course, and for instance, including a variety of stakeholders and doing triangulation of the data, so asking the same question to different stakeholders. I mean, there are some techniques that help to do a robust analysis. And I'm sure that with the next guidelines on social LCA that will be published, there will be more guidance on this aspect. Of course, as most of the people that is doing social LCA comes from engineering background or scientific background, so I think that there is a lot to learn from social science. And there are many techniques, as it was said, also component analysis. And I mean, there are methodologies that they have to be used in a rigorous way in order to have a robust assessment and to provide robust results. Of course, it is also important to distinguish when we want to assess just hotspot, so to realize where there are the main problems, and when we want to assess impacts, where you have to also analyze the cause-effect chain. So it is possible to do the social assessment in a rigorous way. And of course, it's important to, I think that social LCA is very good because the comprehensiveness of the methodology in terms of impact categories and stakeholders allow to also to verify the information that you get from the interviews. And of course, as much, the more interviews you can do, the better it is. And unlike LCA, you cannot do a proper assessment only through desk research. Of course, you have to spend more money and time to collect the data. This is the main difference, but it's still possible to get to robust results.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lucia. Yeah, I was just like maybe wanted to hear that kind of information, and I will then keep following on these guidelines. So I'm really interested.
Yeah, I'm confident that they will be useful to also to clarify all these technical aspects.
I can add something from our experience in NEMO, and I think I see Alberto smiling because he knows what I'm going to say. Yeah, that it's much easier to do desk research with the environmental data, but it's very hard to convince companies, in the case of mining companies, to let us doing field research about social analysis. So we saw that mining companies, they provide us quite easily environmental data, but social, and then I think Alberto knows, it's very hard to convince company to let us doing interviews and field research.
Yeah, and also to communicate the results, because we also had an experience of studies that have been done with companies, but then there are confidentiality constraints, so we cannot publish the results. So it's for sure it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, this kind of analysis is seen as a threat by the companies much more than just an environmental economic analysis.
Sure. Yeah, because there is more reputational risk involved.
Yeah, that is something that you have been mentioning. So I have also done research with the artisanal small-scale miners, and it's extremely more easy to have this kind of assessments with them, with the small-scale miners, even on field, in very dangerous countries than in very safe countries like inside the European Union with big companies. And this is something that is really a threat to the social life cycle assessment, or an obstacle. How to create the collaborative framework between the different kind of partners in order to be able to do this kind of assessments, even if finally all the data are confidential and you cannot share them, but even to perform fully the social life cycle assessment as it is taught in the guidelines by UNEP. I think that that is the real challenge for all the Horizon 2020 projects collaborating with mining companies, know how to explain that this is not a threat to their reputation, but it's actually a research and assessment like the life cycle cost or the environmental life cycle assessment.
And do you think that this has to do with, to come back maybe a bit to Claudia's presentation, to the perceived risk that they are afraid that the outcomes may have worse results? Because, well, from a technical point of view, we also sometimes see that in our project that companies are afraid of what people may think or that they don't understand, and that they actually imagine the results much worse than they are. Or you think it's really a real risk that they fear?
So for our case, from what we learned from the perception, the point is that the perception can be much more powerful than the real impact. So no matter if it is good or bad. So, and I mean, in some cases, I think that mining companies, let's say, are right to be scared about this. But this means that maybe they don't do enough, but maybe it's, in some cases, it's just then the communication, for example, that they don't put enough effort in that because they are not somehow aligned with not only with what community thinks, but they are not aligned with the way they should communicate this. So maybe in a simple way, or maybe just what we thought about Neves Corvo, just to put a sign close to the river where they discharge water with very simple information to say that that water is safe. Maybe after, I don't know, 20 kilometers we discovered from the environmental assessment. So sometimes it's just that maybe the management is not really aligned with that, and it's maybe the task of these projects or more NGOs, people that really work on site, to make them aware of this.
Okay. If I can add on that, this goes in line with a conversation I had with a social scientist, and I was asking how and if like environmental LCA or social LCA can bring inputs for social license to operate, and how to communicate these results in order to go for the acceptance. And the social scientist I spoke with was very, how to say that, very not confident of the issues and of the effect communicating scientific results can have on the local community. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to share as well.
I think that is related with my previous comment on the intentionality of the studies. I think that an assessment is an evaluation document. It's not a document to be used to show people that has to increase acceptance on a specific sector, as the evaluation on the environmental performance is not about convincing any actor that the place will perform better environmentally. So all of us know the limits of the assessments. An assessment has a goal, has an intentionality, has a methodology, and the results are what you got after having that. So when the intentionality of an assessment is saying to the people, look, the impacts are gonna be better or are gonna be bad, then you are trying to influence the society. And of course, the social actors are aware of that. That's why from a social scientist point of view, it's not really fair to try to do such a thing. But I understand that from the environmental engineer point of view, it's different because your object of study is not aware of itself.
Yeah.
I think actually that these discussions also came back in one of the SLO events we did earlier, that indeed as a engineer, you have the mindset of, okay, if we show them that everything is going to be better, people will accept and change their opinion, but it's not that easy. So it's really a long-term process of establishing communication and listening and co-design very often as well. Yes, well, I think we, yeah.
I think that is a point that shows how this kind of studies need to have people of social science background, because the first axiom, the first basis of social science is that you will try not to influence your object of analysis. And by trying to have an intentionality with a social science assessment, you're actually going against your own study and going against the science of social science, of course. So being aware of the basics of your discipline or the framework of your discipline is key to perform an assessment.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, because actually I was a bit surprised when Lucia said earlier that the social LCA is mostly engineers, well, done by engineers. Well, okay, actually I was thinking it's probably from both ways, engineers coming from environmental LCA going to social, and then also social scientists trying to, but I think we indeed need certainly both
I think that there are both, but the LCA, I mean, the social LCA comes from the LCA community, no? That is mostly scientific, I mean, engineering, as an engineering background. Then there are, in the communities, there are some experts from the social sciences, but I think that the root and the idea also of having the product-based assessment comes from the LCA community that is mostly engineering.
Yes, I understand.
But of course, the multidisciplinarity and the collaboration between different disciplines, it's extremely important here to improve and to provide more meaningful analysis.
Okay. Well, I think that's maybe a nice statement to conclude with. We're already a bit over time, but we will certainly, I mean, we do aim to keep this discussion going and also have some further events. And it's really nice to see people from different backgrounds here indeed, because it's always, it's nicer to have different opinions and different mindsets to come to shared conclusions, let's say. So I want to thank all our presenters, especially for the nice presentations and the nice insights. Also the people joining who gave their reactions and responded. And we do hope that we will maybe in real life see you again somewhere next year or hear you in another event. So thank you very much all, and well, have a nice day further.
Thank you very much. It was very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisbeth. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
It's a pity. Andrea also left.
Yeah. Now I will end it.